There's another important piece of evidence in biology that has to be explained by either staying inside the room or jumping outside the room of the natural universe for an explanation. Let me give you an illustration of this. I had a crime one time, it was a sad crime, in which a woman was killed with a really interesting device. She was killed with a garrote. A garrote is a strangulation device. It's wire attached by two handles. Now, when the officers got to the crime scene, the killer actually left the garrote at the scene, and they decided to collect it as evidence. Now, you might think, well, of course they did. Well, why? Why would they collect it as evidence? Why would they think that these two pieces of wood and wire were anything more than a broken piece of there's a ficus plant in the room. It's got a wooden dowel. It's got some wire attached around the tree. Couldn't it have just come from that? Couldn't it have just broken off from some piece of furniture in the room? They said, no, I don't think it's that. I think it's going to be something that has been designed by the killer to commit this crime. Well, okay, that's really interesting. So they thought, just on the appearance of this device, that it was designed. They looked at it and they said, this appears to be designed by somebody. Well, what is it exactly that we determine as designed? What is it we use? What are the tools that we look at, that we consider in our heads to decide if something is just created by natural forces or was instead designed by a creative mind? I've been thinking about that for about 20 years. My background is as a designer. I have a bachelor's degree in design and a master's degree in architecture. And so a lot of my early career was spent in design. And I knew that my illustrations appeared to be designed. But what is it about the garrote that made it appear to be designed? Well, I think there are actually 8 things, and I want to show them to you in a diagram. I think that these 8 things, when considered together, really have the best inference you can make is that this object has been designed. And I want to talk about those 8 things very, very briefly. The first is that if you can't explain the appearance of this thing through chance, just random chance, probabilities, hey, maybe if you have enough time, this wood and this wire would have come together by chance. Really? That's not a great explanation for the wood and the wire. So that we can kind of move from that. And if it's not by chance, you only have another possibility. It's either by physical law or by design. So if there's no way to explain it by chance, there's a good inference that it's design. Also, you got to think about it in terms of, does it look like something that you recognize that you know already is designed? The officers, when they collected this piece of evidence, this was back in the day, 1970s, and they had just seen a movie called The Godfather. And in The Godfather, there were 2 killings in which a garrote was used. And they figured, hey, I've seen that garrote before. I've seen people design a garrote in the movies, and this looks like that garrote. So if we know that thing is designed and this thing looks like that thing, why wouldn't we think this thing is designed? So if it looks like something that's designed that you already know exists and is designed, that's a good inference to make that the thing you're considering, the garrote, is also designed. But there's more than that. There's a level of intricacy here. If you look at the way the garrote was made, I looked at it very carefully, the kinds of knots at the end of the wire where it was wrapped around were sophisticated knots, making it even more unlikely it could happen by chance. When you see a certain level of sophistication, design is a good inference. And not only that, this seemed to me to be informationally driven. In other words, as it turned out, the killer in this case used a handbook in order to design his garrote. This is kind of crazy, but believe it or not, only one group could I find in the history of America that have actually been trained to build and use garrotes. Those are naval aviators in World War II. And it turns out our killer's father was a naval aviator, and I think likely he had access to the book that they used to train them how to make garrotes just like this. When you've got an object that is dependent upon information, and because we know information comes from minds, a good inference is that the object is designed. Also, there's a goal. When you see a goal appears to be in the actual design, like the designer or whoever caused this had a goal in mind, design's a good inference. And if you look at other devices that are similar to the garrote, like the devices we use to cut wax or to cut clay, they don't have big handles on the ends the way, for example, this garrote does. The handles tell me that whoever was going to use this piece of wire knew he was going to exert incredible pressure, and he was going to need handles so he wouldn't cut himself. Even the handles give me some idea of the goal of this object. And when you think something has been designed or created with a goal goal in mind, design is a better inference than chance or law. But let's talk about law for a second. Can natural physical laws, the laws of physics and chemistry, could they have brought these two pieces of wood together with this wire to create the garrote? Could I put them in a drawer separately and open and close the drawer a bazillion times? How many times would I have to do that before this would emerge as a garrote? Well, there's no physical law that'll make that happen. And if it's not chance and it's not physical law, design is a good inference. But there's more. There's this thing called irreducible complexity. What I mean is, mousetraps, for example, are irreducibly complex to 6 pieces. We've tried to build a 5-piece mousetrap. It'd be cheaper to build, but we cannot figure out how to do it. They are irreducibly complex to 6. Our garrote is irreducibly complex to 3. Why that's important is the evolutionary processes have a difficult time explaining irreducible complexity. Remember, evolution is one mutation acted on over time, then another mutation, then another mutation. If the device we're looking at isn't even functional or operational until it has 6 pieces in place, well, then you know some slow, progressive creation process is not in place. You know somebody has put all 6 pieces of that mousetrap together at once. Design is the better inference when you see irreducible complexity. And finally, when you see that there's a choice of things that the designer could have used, but instead he decided to use this, and our killer used the garrote because he wanted to be quiet at the crime scene. He knew that the victim was living right next door to another set of residents, and so he wanted to use a quiet device. He thought he could strangle her before she would make a sound. The fact that he chose something specific to that location tells us that the best inference is a designer in this case of the weapon. Now, why do I spend all this time telling you this? Because I think there are things in biology that scream design. Even atheists will concede that there is the appearance of design in biology. Let me give you an example. The poster child of all of this is something that Michael Behe, a biochemist from Lehigh University, discovered years ago. It is something called a bacterial flagellum. I'll show you the diagram. This is a small device, a machine that exists in biology that we see at the molecular level. It spins a whipping tail and it mobilizes, it moves bacteria. It is a rotary engine. And as you look at this, you probably think to yourself, yeah, you know, it does look like a rotary engine. As a matter of fact, here's a diagram that shows it alongside man-made rotary engines. Now, what's interesting about this little device, which is created with 40 specifically shaped proteins that all have to be active together at the same time, a 39-piece machine will not work. You need a 40-piece machine in order for this to spin the tail. All of these, I think, scream design based on the template I just showed you. Here's the template laid on top of the bacterial flagellum. Can you see that chance is not going to explain this formation of proteins to make this little molecular motor? Also, it looks like something we know is, as a matter of fact, we were building rotary engines that look just like this for years before we ever discovered this one in biology. Our rotary engines that look just like this are not copied from the bacterial flagellum. The bacterial flagellum actually looks like it's copied from a rotary engine. And if you know the rotary engine's design, why wouldn't you think this is designed? Not only that, there's a level of complexity in how this spins the rotor. It spins it by a chemical charge, electrical charge that's chemical, that is still under active investigation by biologists. It is a modern wonder of the universe. That kind of complexity is hard to explain from natural processes. Design is a better inference. And is it informationally driven? Yes, you already know. DNA drives all of this. It's DNA that actually instructs the construction of the 40 proteins to make the bacterial flagellum. And is it goal-oriented? Yes, when the DNA instructs it, it instructs it in steps called operons, sentences in the DNA that say, first build this part, then build that part, then build the next part, then build the third, and it does this one step after it, and then at some point it stops building. Why? Because it's done. It's reached its goal. It's clear that the information from DNA is goal-driven, and when it reaches its goal, it stops. And can you explain this from some natural forces of physics? No. As a matter of fact, we don't even have natural forces of physics we can use to explain how all the pieces of the motor might come together, let alone how this entire thing is formed from scratch. We don't have an explanation with just physics. And is it irreducibly complex? Not just 6 like a mousetrap, it's irreducibly complex to 40. That means that the best explanation is that something causes all 40 to come together, because we would need evolution to take it one step at a time from 1 to 40, and there is no evolutionary pathway that people can point to show how that could happen. As a matter of fact, we see 5 or 6 or 7 proteins in this machine that are specific to just this machine. They exist nowhere else in the bacteria to be evolved from. And finally, we're looking at, is it a selection process? There are lots of different molecular motors in biology. This one seems to be specifically chosen for this purpose in this organism. Now, why is this powerful? Think about it. How do we explain this by staying inside the room? If the best inference related to this machine is that it has all the attributes you see in the diagram here, all the attributes of design, the same attributes of design we used to identify the garrote as designed, why would we not think it's design? How do we explain design by staying in the room? Well, I can only see one potential explanation that's ever been offered, and that is that somehow evolution has co-opted something that is significantly robust. Typically in this case, it's something called a type 3 secretion system. I'll show it to you. This type 3 secretion system is similar in its appearance to the rotary motor, but the problem we have with this is that the type 3 secretion system also displays all the attributes of design. You can't borrow something designed, add a few pieces, and then say we have something that's not designed. But worse yet, we now know by dating these two small machines that the bacterial flagellum is actually older than the type 3 secretion system. So we don't have an evolutionary process that jumps up. By the way, that process is called co-option. So if you look at this diagram, how in the world are we going to explain this by staying inside the room? We have to hope that some evolutionary explanation will emerge, but it's not. Now, if it looks like it's designed, there might just be a mind outside the universe that is a grand designer, that is intelligent enough to be the source of information in the DNA that guides this process, that then can be said to be the intelligent designer that explains the design we see in the universe. Now look at our suspect description. Pretty robust, right? We've got a spaceless, timeless, non-material, eternal, all-powerful, creative mind that has fine-tuned the universe and is actually the source of information in DNA, which we use as the origin of life. And now we can say that same creative mind is the best explanation for the appearance of design we see in biology. 4 categories of evidence that are best explained by staying inside the room? I don't think so. The best explanation is still outside the room.